With every major world event, we see an impact on office design.
The offices workers left aren't the ones many will return to, for those who return at all.
We have been through crises before, whether that was 9/11, Superstorm Sandy, where you really have to take a step back and move with a sense of urgency.
Thermal scanners, plexiglass shields, and one-way hallways are now part of the workplace, as concerns about coronavirus spread have forced firms to retrofit spaces to bring workers back. These modifications are only a start.
Innovation comes out of moments like the ones we're in right now.
Offices are also being redesigned and reimagined for an uncertain future where health is the focus, even if COVID-19 is no longer a threat. So, what's changed in offices open now, and how will the future office look and function differently? Let's start with the retrofit. At its office in Midtown Manhattan, RXR Realty employees are back at work, with modifications.
So our objective is to use the tools and technologies that we implemented to make the new abnormal at the office feel as normal as possible.
Employees now start their days by opening up the company's mobile app to answer a series of health questions. Once cleared, they will get a green, allowing them to enter the 32-story building which the real estate firm owns. Inside, thermal cameras take employees' temperatures as they walk through the lobby.
The goal is not to let people not come to work, but to really ensure that they're not coming in sick to potentially make other people sick in the building.
I will say that there's no such thing as no risk, and I think there has to be a good reason to bring people back.
RXR owns more than 25 million square feet of office space.
We wanted to test out a lot of what we put in place for ourselves to make sure that it works as our tenants come back to work.
Some of the things they're testing? Touchless entry at turnstiles that automatically call elevators that take workers to their floor. Rotation staffing that keeps floors at less than 50% capacity, plexiglass dividers between workstations, reduced seating in conference rooms, and small social distancing devices employees wear.
If I'm within 6 feet of someone else, this will vibrate and go off. Same thing for that person. It also serves as a contact tracer so that if someone does get sick, we can then determine who is around that person and make sure that we can notify them.
Many of these solutions are aimed at preventing transmission through large droplets or shared surfaces, but the virus can also transmit via smaller aerosolized droplets.
So this is trickier to deal with in buildings. In a typical office building today, we heat and cool the space with air. This means that we spend a lot of energy heating and cooling that air, and we don't want to just exhaust the used air, so we recirculate a portion of it, meaning that if occupants introduce pathogens into that air, they can remain airborne.
One way of mitigating this is by increasing the building's intake of natural air, which is something RXR is doing. The company is also replacing that air more often. Another way is through filtration of that recirculated air. Some buildings are upgrading to filters that can catch smaller particles, such as the MERV 13 filters RXR uses, but existing air systems limit exactly which filters buildings can use.
Another strategy is ultraviolet germicidal irradiation, which means that you have light fixtures, and instead of outputting visible light, it's ultraviolet light that can inactivate the SARS-CoV-2 virus.
These retrofits, of course, cost money. RXR said it spent millions of dollars across all of its properties to make these changes.
And some of the extremes might shed away once we have a vaccine and we can move more freely around, but some of it's going to stay because people are going to say, you know what, I'm more sensitive about my health and wellness.
Plans for Gensler's new office in Miami were set in February. Then, as the coronavirus took hold in March,
that design as it stood at that point of time no longer worked.
So Carlos Valera, the architecture firm's managing director in Miami, began the redesign, starting by identifying what potential problems existed in the original plans.
Here we see an area in which there is a row of workstations that align with what we might have done prior to the pandemic, in which you would see a lot of density.
Prior to the pandemic, dense offices were the trend. Average square footage per employee had decreased from 211 square feet in 2009 to 194 at the end of 2017.
We see here what we had conceived as a hospitality lounge. That type of design solution is no longer possible.
With the pain points identified, Valera and his team set out to design an office that would be ready for both pre-vaccine and post-vaccine futures.
The thinking behind this new reimagined workplace is really more about experimentation.
One of the ideas Gensler is testing, separating the office into zones. Clients and employees enter separately.
We have here what we're referring as a sanitation room. We also have created an isolation room in case, again, that someone is not feeling well.
The two zones will also have separate ventilation systems to help limit potential exposure. And by putting these reconfigurable booths into the client zone, Gensler is also creating a space for meetings outside of the main office. That flexibility extends to the employee space as well, where Valera has removed many of the fixed elements.
We have workstations that have the option to be reconfigured into a 2-person pod, 3-person pod, 4-person pod, but also that the workstation itself can move around and be set in a way that you're not facing each other.
The firm is using a spatial intelligence tool called Graph to map out distancing scenarios it may need during the pandemic. It could also help determine where more seats are needed after a vaccine.
So what you see in this plan is kind of what a phase 1 high-risk transmission scenario is. But also we are tooling the space in a way that we can densify as needed.
But how much is still unclear. Global Workplace Analytics estimates we will see 25 to 30% of the workforce working at home multiple days a week by the end of 2021. That will not only impact density, but also change workers' relationship to the office itself.
I think that in some cases we're realizing that we don't need the office as much as we thought we did. I also think that we're realizing how much we miss the office.
A June survey of corporate leaders found that in the future, 82% plan to allow remote working at least some of the time. Valera calls this the hybrid model.
When you're working from home, some of those spaces could be used for something else.
Maybe the idea of large expanses of desk space in a small cafe might be flipped, and maybe we end up with more of a cafe and less desk space.
In a hybrid model, focused work could be done at home. Offices could be more flexible spaces used for meeting.
I think the whole idea of the office might even become more flexible. So maybe we might see a new type of business pop up that's kind of a restaurant with individual conference rooms.
Of course, these solutions only work for firms that can keep workers at home at least some of the time. The National Bureau of Economic Research found about 37% of U.S. workers could plausibly do their jobs from home. So, experts say what workers will most likely see in the future are some of the smaller changes aimed at keeping occupants safe, including touchless tech, more access to outdoor space, and better ventilation inside.
Now, as you think about the workplace, you've got to think what would have been 5-10 years from now and start incorporating that today.
As for larger design changes, it's still too early to know.
If we build for flexibility to explore what works and what doesn't work, the process is going to teach us what that future of workplace should be.